The King of the Battlefield Chapter 161. Chapter 161, God-Killing Spear, 2. Translation, Nadu. Edit, Lee Suras. Status bar. Muyong took the box and after completing all the trials, he turned his status viewer to check his results. There weren't many changes overall, but in regards to stats, there was quite a bit of change that was noticeable. Stats. Strength 515, 300 plus 215, Agility 504, 315 plus 189. Stamina 491, 321 plus 170, Intelligence 500, 245 plus 255. Wisdom 410, 275 plus 135, Fighting Aura 340, 180 plus 160. Magic Resistance 525, 125 plus 400, Spirit Ability 410, 260 plus 150. Evil Tendency 450, 300 plus 150, Divine Powers 330, 230 plus 100. Total level, 491. Among the primary stats, the pure stats related to the body greatly increased. It seemed on average, they increased by 30. Especially agility and stamina, they increased a lot. Was it due to the body's balance and repeated training? It was an amazing result for just investing a month of time. 500. Strength, agility, intelligence, and magic resistance. These 4 stats were over 500. He was touched. 500 was the standard. The unknown world where barely anyone in the top 10 has ever reached. It was the entrance. What scared Muyong was the fact that his future development was boundless. However, that 500 wasn't the end. There was still a lot of pure stats Muyong could raise. If he continued to develop like this without any troubles, he might even be able to step into the 6th metamorphosis, which was known to be unreachable. This is fine enough. Muyong nodded. There were countless things he had earned after coming to the Sun Guild. On top, he had confirmed everything Alexandro had hidden. Now, he needed to prepare to take the next leap. Muyong stayed mysterious. He never exposed himself to others. This enriched and expanded the rumors and solidified Muyong's position. Of course, it wasn't like there weren't any groups who made malicious slanders, but most of the people raised their voices and called out an angel's name. The moment my mysteriousness ends, my human nature will show. Mysteriousness was important. Human's imagination was truly a fickle weapon. If Muyong became a guild master or wanted to rise to a certain position, it was highly likely that his mysteriousness would end right away. He would be revealed to be a human and adoration for him would disappear. However, if he stayed still, his mysteriousness would continue to grow and he would be a more powerful influence. And so, Muyong selected the people who would meet him. The talents who crossed the Blue Temple. More than I expected. I have chosen them accordingly to the criteria you gave me. Oscar spoke as he raised his chin. There were about 150 people gathered in the drill hall. Although their age and sex were all different, they didn't really seem like beginners. Lightspeed E-Pin, Duelist Gefelt, White-Eyed Yada. Among them, there were also some familiar faces. Compared to the past, they were quite different, but as their distinctive figures didn't easily change, he was able to recognize them. Although they weren't in the top 10, they were easily within the top 100 humans. This month is a good month. It was quite rare to have these many talents to come over at once. And wasn't there a saying that those who would become famous later would be known from their childhood? A fight for survival in the demon god's territory. And, there were quite a few who would transform into worthy warriors after they finished the 100 trials Alexandro made. That person is the angel. Became someone told me to, but what is the reason you only wanted us to gather? People murmured. Of course, they would be curious. since they weren't told of other reasons. Myung also felt the gaze of the third person who entered the drill hall. Serafina. She didn't fully open her heart to Myung. Myung's true face. She invested everything to find out about this truth. From here on out, every word he spoke of was important. Do you want to return to Earth? Is there a way to return? If there is, please. Everyone in the underworld had the instinct and desire to return. Alexandro did and Myung as well. Those who have only been here for a month, that feeling would be at its peak. Since they were suddenly dragged here, if there was a way to return they would do it. Myung, who had instantly grabbed hold of the mood, slowly talked. Kill the 72 demon gods. Then, you can return. Demon gods, what are they? Myung made a short reply. Source of evil. The start of all evil. That was the demon gods. Myung continued to talk. There are about 180 million devils in the underworld. And the 72 demon gods are those who rule over those devils, and they only exist to destroy things. We need to fight against them. Everyone's jaw dropped. He could even feel Serafina shaking. The specific number of devils was only found out after the Great Calamity. Currently, at this moment, no one was aware that their numbers were about 180 million. It was truly a big number. Currently, it was a bigger number than the human survivors in the underworld. Does it seem impossible? However, don't worry. Because God has given you guys power to fight the devils. Myung wore the mask. He even sold a god he didn't even believe in. However, it wasn't exactly wrong either. Since the system of the underworld was made by the collection of godly beings. The devils want to eliminate all beings. They will even swallow up the earth eventually. Soon, in the near future, every human being on earth will be summoned here and they will be exposed to the devils. Your families will be ravaged and their heads cut off and rolling on the ground. Angel. Is that true? Everyone was shocked. As if they didn't think the scale of this summon would be that massive. In their point of view, Myung was an angel. There was credibility in his words. And another person was also surprised. Serafina. How did he? Her pupils shook continuously. The possibility for all humans to be summoned was now just being discussed by the upper classes. Before a prophecy came about, Myung forestalled. If they waited for a prophecy, it would be too late. Even if they were to start preparing now, they wouldn't have enough time, but how could he wait another 4 years? Although he only said it to about 150 people, rumors would spread soon. Myung planned to not tell people directly. This is because he knew that the power of rumors was stronger than that. Prepare. I will teach you how to fight against them. I will give you strength for you to enter their base and stab their hearts. The power for you to protect yourself and your families. People tend to exert more family affection in extreme circumstances. It might be different for someone who has lived in the underworld for quite a while, but as these people were just summoned from Earth, it wouldn't be odd if they became emotional. These 150 people performed well at the Blue Temple. They knew how to survive at least. Also, they were aware of the law of the jungle. Since they knew that they would die if they were weak, they were most likely to grab hold of the robe that Myung gave them and not let go. Swoosh! Myung spread Gabriel's wings. The divine powers poured out and instantly surrounded the place. A gentle light shined on Myung's entire body. The effect gave the illusion that he was not human. Production. In the end, everything visible was all production. Moving people was also 90% production. You guys are chosen to be warriors to fight against evil. Their faces loosened up. It was the moment their hardships started. Myung declared war on evil. As if he himself wasn't evil, he created a facade. Serafina felt a more extreme confusion. As there was nothing incorrect about what Myung had said, and he even knew about something no one else was aware of. Since there were no lies in what he said, it would be more confusing. Was he really an emissary of a god? Serafina bit her nails. He was truly a mysterious being. However, the more she looked at him, he seemed to be far from evil. He always insisted on the annihilation of evil. He showed his goodness. He was worried about the future of mankind. How could someone like him be evil? She gave everything to catch him when he let his guard down. She even gave up her virginity. Muyong seemed off guard at a glance. Serafina had no idea that even that was Muyong's intentions. The boundary between good and evil collapsed increasingly. A problem where there was no answer. When she wanted someone to give her the answer, Muyong drove a wedge in. The demon god's strength is continuously getting stronger. Serafina, we need to prepare. Prepare. While they were dining, Muyong spoke. Do you know why I came to this place? I don't know. Serafina spoke politely. It was to pretend to be devoted after that day. Muyong put down the fork. For gods, a moment is like an eternity to us. Some prophecies have already arrived, but there is a possibility that those could have already happened. In fact, prophecies are something you have to manage before they occur. And I came to solve those a step ahead before those occur. Muyong closed his eyes. His appearance seemed like he was sad. And he continued to talk. I'm the only one. That's why I need to open up all possibilities. This is the reason why I have all types of wings. The reason why I'm saying this now, is because the time is imminent. The time is imminent. A man with black wings would destroy the world. Perhaps, the man with black wings might not be Muyong. Since Muyong had white and grey wings as well. That's why the reason sounded so good. Muyong opened his eyes. The demon gods will start their activities soon. However, don't worry. There is a weapon to keep them in check. If I have the god-killing spear, I can keep them in check. Serafina flinched. This was also something that only the leaders knew of. Actually, they were preparing to take actions related to it. Serafina was shaken. The actions Muyong showed and what he said. If everything was true, there was no time to hesitate. Then suddenly, Muyong warned. But, this conversation can't be leaked. Why? Serafina was curious. His intention to get the spear cannot be leaked. There was a possibility that Wang Chunlin would notice and withdraw himself. It was because he never took risks. And so, he gave a reasonable excuse. It's because there are enemies on the inside. Didn't ninjas break into Malalan recently? You're right. It was news she heard a few days ago. That ninjas broke into Malalan. And that they took a person who was in prison. However, Malalan was impenetrable. It was definitely not a place where ninjas could easily enter. Unless there was an enemy on the inside. If they know I want the spear and if I failed to gain it, there will be a huge impact on the people. I don't want that to happen. Muyong was urging Serafina to make a choice. Serafina clenched her fists hard. Although it was forced, it was like giving her a choice. Her shaking stopped little by little. Numerous circumstances. Muyong knew things that no one else knew. Perhaps, he might also be aware of her confusion and the prophecy. And so, she made a choice. I understand. Let's keep it a secret and act. However, if you are planning to take the spear quietly, you need to hide and become my first knight. A first knight. It referred to the knight who protected the cult judge from very close by. All cult judges kept a first knight, but only Serafina had the position vacant. Chapter 162, The God-Killing Spear, 3. Translation, Te. Edit, Lee Suras. It was because thus far, no one talented enough for her to keep by her side had appeared. The first knight was the closest person to a cult judge. The cult judges, as the title suggested, were people that conducted judgment. Even a sage king had no authority to change the outcome of that judgment. However, there was just one person. There was only one position that was allowed to twist the outcome. That was precisely the first night. However, one had to be strong, righteous, and have pure divine powers. Even if wicked people had divine power, they would ultimately lose it. Their purity would also be low, so they would not be first night material. However, if Myung was really an angel, the purity of his divine power will probably be high. It was Seraphina's last test. The purity of the Sage King was 89%. Even the saintesses rarely passed 85%. Even if they had the same divine power, depending on this purity, different power could be exhibited, and so if he was an angel, he might even be able to pierce the barrier. However, the tool that could measure the purity of divine power was not in this place. If I want to become a first knight, what do I have to do? Myung asked, and Seraphina answered. You have to go to the Holy Saintess's palace with me. The number of saintesses that existed at the same time was always different. At the moment, there were 3 saintesses existing in Malalan. One among them was in the Holy Saintess's palace. From that place, she first noticed the energy of evil and contacted Seraphina. The Holy Saintess's palace. Myung had also heard of it. That a saintess was residing in the Holy Saintess's palace. Snow suddenly sprang up in Myung's mind. In the past, she was also a saintess. A veiled woman who suddenly appeared after the great calamity. Having realized that Myung was Azura's apostle, Snow had sent him a message in preparation for this moment. Although originally, I would have to go to Diablo's altar. She was curious as to what Snow had seen and hoped for in Myung. However, right now, the god-killing spear was more urgent. It was the chance to be able to catch Wang Chunglin. Even if he couldn't catch him, he could hinder him. Yes. The time for the reunion that he had hoped for. This time, no one could interfere. He wouldn't let them. Okay. Myung said shortly. Then Seraphina smiled faintly. Thank you. Since it isn't far, 3 days should be enough. Seraphina thought as she changed her clothes. Divine power was literally divine strength. A noble and divine strength that could not be mindlessly approached. The purity of that divine power was shown based on the righteousness of the being. However, the limit of humans was 89%. No one had ever passed 90%. The same was true decades ago, even though the Sage King had changed twice and around 15 saintesses had appeared. Even so, it was known that the current Sage King had the highest purity of divine power. Even Seraphina had only 82%. After this, a 1% difference would result in a huge difference in quality. In fact, when women had purity of divine power that exceeded 85% and they were granted authority from the gods, they were called saintesses, and it was safe to say that the cult judges were those women who unfortunately could not become saintesses. Seraphina was also one of the saintess candidates in the past. If he passes, I will follow him. Seraphina just wanted to check whether or not the arrival of angels that didn't exist in the underworld was true. She had read all information on Myung, but as if he had really fallen from the sky, there was nothing. There was a story of a human who was close to him, so she had gone in search for someone called Kim Tae-won but had learned nothing. He just kept saying how Myung was a special being. To follow gods or angels, it was only natural. Thus far there hadn't been anything strange. He seemed really righteous and was indeed tenacious. Well, he. Just as she was about to put on her underwear, she heard a subtle laugh. As she turned her head, there was a fairy hidden in the corner, covering her mouth and laughing. A fairy. Come to think of it, among the stories about Myung there were also some related to fairies. That there was a fairy that followed Myung. Fairies did not follow evil beings. That rumor had heightened Myung's credibility further. Perhaps this was the rumored fairy? However, fairies loved pranks. And if the prank didn't work, they sulked and ran away. Seraphina turned her head and looked at her underwear. A children's prank? She laughed silently. There was a little caterpillar crawling around in her underwear. A childish prank. As if no one said she was a fairy. Oh my goodness! There is a bug! She shouted without any emotion and threw her underwear on the bed. It's really scary. She acted soullessly, as though her soul was evaporating at a frightening rate. Well he. Then, with a peculiar laugh, the fairy appeared before Serafina. You dare wag your tail in front of Wuhi's dear husband? You fox-like wench! Wuhi had learned. A good man needed to be thoroughly managed. And Weung was an outstanding man. She knew that flies like Serafina would gather around him someday. But she couldn't just leave it alone. The problem was that she was a step behind. She didn't think that the deed would be done by the time the fairies were finished mourning. Your dear husband. Serafina tilted her head. Wuhi glared fiercely. Yes. The man you wagged your tail after is Wuhi's darling husband. Do you need to taste the bitterness of defeat by Wuhi for you to come to your senses? Wuhi is capable of far more than this, so be careful. Goodness! Serafina was genuinely surprised. If she wasn't misunderstanding, then the fairy was courting a corporeal being. This was completely unprecedented. No, if he is an angel. I understand. In any case, the two seemed to be in a very close relationship. That turned out great. She was curious about many things. What is he like? The one and only star. He is not the type of man that a fox like you could go after. Even while he has only kissed his cheek, but you. The moment she spoke of kissing his cheek, Wuhi's shoulders drooped. She seemed to know everything that had happened between Serafina and Weung. Serafina spoke. Wuhi wants to grow bigger too. I wish I had a body like you. Wuhi pouted. Serafina was baffled by how different her attitude was from her prank shortly before. Then Wuhi turned her head. She touched her fingers together, said after a pause. You know. Wuhi is curious. How does it feel when your skin touches each other? It is warm. And if you embrace, it's cozy. Then if you kiss, I feel ecstasy. Serafina told the truth. For some reason or other, it seemed necessary. Wuhi looked at Serafina as if she was envious, and spoke without confidence. Don't take away my darling husband. I have no intention of taking him away. Really? Yes. Honestly? Yes. Wuhi blinked and looked at Serafina. Serafina didn't avoid eye contact either. The fairy's eyes are really innocent. A body like a doll. She was remarkably cute, but her most beautiful feature was her eyes. Could it be said that they were crystal clear? Well he. You're really a good kid, huh? Then you be the concubine. The concubine. The second wife is called the concubine. Ah. She hadn't thought that far, but for now she complied. Otherwise, it seemed the crystal clear fairy would fly away like a breeze. She seemed to be that insecure. Sorry for the prank earlier. Well, he will apologize. It's all right. More than that, there is something I'm curious about. What is it? Well, he knows everything. Is it true that that person is really an angel? An angel? He isn't though. What? Well, he answered naturally, and Serafina was baffled once again. He wasn't an angel? After this, will he give a completely unexpected response? Darling husband is Hope. He isn't something like an angel. Hope, Hope. She murmured. It was abstract. She had no idea what will he meant by that. Will he quietly clicked her tongue. Darling husband is not an angel or a devil. Humans are so stupid. Why would you define darling husband with such shoddy words? Because undefined beings breed fear. It's okay if he's an angel but not a devil? Why? Because angels are good and devils are evil. See, that's stupid. Darling husband is just darling husband. Why don't you understand that? Well, he said easily. However, it seemed that he didn't realize that that was the most difficult problem. Serafina asked in a heartfelt wish. Is he really hope? Yep. He's hope and everyone's hope. No one, not even darling husband, knows darling husband's heart, but he knows. He loves and cares about you guys more than anyone else. Although the way he expresses it is intense, he is even envious of it. He spoke confidently without an ounce of hesitancy. He loves us. Serafina's body trembled lightly. Myung wore a helmet that hid his face. He wore armor and concealed his wings. Having learned to manipulate his wings by solving 100 trials, he was now able to hide and reveal them at will. And together with a procession of about 1,000 people, he departed for the holy saintess's palace. However, no one in this procession knew that Myung was the commander-in-chief of the Sun Guild. Serafina merely described him as the new seed. A seed. Something like a knight's servant. He couldn't immediately become a first knight. It meant that for now he had to start as a seed. However, until now, Serafina had not kept even seeds. It was because she had solved everything by herself. That man. Who is he? Have you seen him? For Seraphinum to keep a seed, hey! How dare he become Seraphinum's? Because of this, he received the glares of everyone around them. Myung was walking slowly, a little distance away from Serafina. He was sitting on top of Myung's shoulder and humming. You look happy. As he spoke quietly, he whispered in Myung's ear. That Serafina woman. She doesn't seem like a bad person. He laughed. Myung merely tilted his head. Up until now, she had been wary and jealous of every woman that approached him, so this was the first time she was acting like this. However, he soon became disinterested. As soon as they arrived at the holy saintess's palace, the test to become a first knight would begin. The purity of divine power. The first and the most important test. Truthfully, Myung was also curious. He had received Gabriel's power, but in the same way, other paladins and holy saintesses also inherited God's powers. He was not sure whether or not he could exceed their purity. It was that moment. The sky became dark. To be exact, an enormous shadow covered the ground. Myung turned his head. And his eyes widened. That dragon! The shape of a familiar dragon soon descended to the ground. A black dragon. Arkaza, the master of an active volcano that spewed darkness. It was the only dragon trained by humans. His frame was 100 in size, and from on top of him a man came down. All eyes were on him, but he immediately approached Serafina. Serafina! What a coincidence! Hansung Nim, it has been a while. But, I don't think it's a coincidence. It seemed that Serafina also knew him. Just that there was a little bit of a thorn in her tone. At that moment, it hit him like a flash of lightning. Yes, Hansung. It was a name like that. That appearance. It was like that in the past. He was the only human dragon contractor. No, a dragon tamer. Through a contract with the dragon, he was able to maintain a youthful appearance for a very long time. All wounds were recovered in an instant, and he was even able to use the dragon language. Rumors of eternal youth and immortality circulated. The Dragon Lord. The Dragon Lord Hansung. He had been the most difficult assassination target for Myung. A man in the top 10 humans and a revolutionary. The man who was the closest to a hero in the past was now in front of Myung. Chapter 163, God-Killing Spear, 3. Translation, Nadu. Edit, Lee Suras. I had a reason to travel nearby. But, by the way, Serafina, you seem to have become more beautiful. Hansung was overly chatty. He was connected to a dragon and his senses were enhanced. His eyes and ears made it possible to hear and find out everything near him. so, Muyang even decreased the sound of his heartbeat. He was happy to see the Dragon Lord, but right now he was currently hiding his identity. If Hansung found out the truth about Muyang, it might be a pain. Stop your lip service. No, you really did become more beautiful. You became a lady since I last saw you about 10 years ago. Now, you can even become my wife, haha. Hansung Nim, you're still the same. Of course, I'm the same as always. Please call me the man who doesn't change. Either way, if you're headed this way, are you going to the Saintess's palace? Hansung looked at the opposite direction. If they went for one more day, they would arrive at the Saintess's palace. At that place, Muyang was planning to complete the test and become a first knight. Originally, cult judges needed to hide their movements. However, Hansung was an exception. Serafina was affirmative. Yes, how about you, Hansung Nim? Actually, I also have a need to go to the Saintess's palace as well. There was a bit of strange incident in the demon god's territory. Hansung scratched his head. The man who was known to be the closest to the title strongest of mankind. However, he was free like the wind as he didn't keep enemies anywhere. Serafina spoke as if she was slightly surprised. It seems like even you have worries, Hansung Nim. Serafina. Even I have feelings. Either way, the movements of demon gods are unusual. Even other transcendental beings are trying to avoid them. Be careful. The demon gods weren't the only ones that were classified as the strongest. The owner of all mountains, the king of all dragons, and the child of the moon. There were even stories that these four didn't fall behind demon gods when compared. Just, that these four tended to not act. There was also rarely anyone who survived after seeing them. Although the story was mostly considered a legend, because there were people who confirmed their identities, rumors were passed down. However, if it was Hansung who was active in the demon god's territory, he might have seen them. At least, he would have met the king of dragons at least once. Since he would have sworn in front of him for the dragon contract. Sniff. 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 It was at that moment. Arkaza, the master of an active volcano that spewed darkness, started to wiggle its nose. Thump. As he slowly moved, as if the sea divided, the paladins and the priests stepped back. It seems like Arkaza found something. Hansung was relaxed. It was because he knew that Arkaza didn't act like that without a reason. Magical dragons were naturally cautious. Then, Arkaza went in front of Muyang. Serafina, who is this man? He's my attendant. Arkaza is reacting to an attendant? As Hansung spoke, Arkaza looked down on Muyang for a while. An overwhelming size. Two pairs of eyes opened and closed vertically. However, Muyang didn't shake. He just faced Arkaza through the small holes on his helmet. Arkaza was a magical dragon. A dragon that controls death. In the past, Muyang took a lot of time to try and kill it. Among all the people he needed to assassinate, Arkaza took the longest to kill. A dragon's senses, especially a dragon like Arkaza, couldn't be thought of the same as a human. However, now he had no reason to kill it. Muyang wasn't an assassin like in the past. He no longer moved by someone else's instructions. I will live free, like a hero. Hansung was like an example of a hero. If he was successful in his revolution after the Great Calamity, humanity would have been able to move a few steps further. In reality, if Muyang hadn't assassinated him himself, it was fair to say that there was no one who could assassinate Hansung and Arkaza. Was it because the Dragon Lord could control death like Muyang and he had seen him for a long time? For some reason, he felt a sense of kinship. Muyang stretched his hand and rubbed the side of Arkaza's nose. Krung! Krung! Arkaza cried softly. However, it was a pleasant sound. Amazing! For Arkaza to allow someone else to touch her beside me. Hansung widened his eyes. Not just Hansung. It was the same for Serafina. When Serafina was still a candidate for a saint, Hansung had lived in Malalan for a few years. As a friend of a sage king and a great guest. Arkaza stayed as well, but it didn't allow anyone else's touch. There was even a person whose shoulder was bitten off because he tried to touch it forcefully. If Hansung didn't stop it, the person would have been eaten by it. Afterward, no one tried to touch Arkaza. It was a pie in the sky. It only allowed people to look upon its majestic figure. But, Muyong touched it as if it was nothing. Arkaza accepted his touch. It was the first time Serafina and Hansung saw this. It seems like he is also related to dragons. The scent of a dragon killer comes from him. Muyong had inherited the dragon hunter effect. He earned it after he killed the dark dragon Barca. However, it was a title that stirred hostility towards dragons. Arkaza's actions were clearly antagonistic. Dragon hunter. Yes. This scent, it's Barca. No wonder. As if now he understood the reasons for Arkaza's actions, he nodded. What is Barca? It's a baby dark dragon. It was a little guy that was good at being annoying. Arkaza said it was thinking of giving it a good beating. But, as Barca's blood can be smelled on him, he feels close to him. Hansung was greatly pleased and approached Muyong. Did you kill Barca? Nod. He couldn't hide it now. He would only beg suspicion if Hansung was to notice him lying. And normally, while dragons were strong beings, it wasn't like hunting them wasn't possible. Why would someone who killed a dragon be satisfied with a mere attendant position? If there is something you want, tell me. If it's something I can do, I'll do it. This is not my will but Arkaza's. It seemed like Arkaza had a bad relationship with Barca. However, Muyong shook his head. Hansung. He wasn't planning to receive anything from him. It was just enough for him to go his own way. Hansung Nim, he is now my attendant but he is a candidate for my first night. Please don't say strange things without my permission. What? A first night? Hansung should have been well aware of what the first night meant. And so, as if he saw them differently, he looked at Muyong and Serafina again. The priest and paladins who were watching them were also surprised. He wasn't just a normal attendant but a first night candidate. I heard that you were the only one without a first night. Actually, while I see you, I wanted to introduce you to a nice kid. Swoosh. Swoosh. Thump. At the same time, from the sky, a huge wyvern appeared. Compared to Arkaza, it was very small but this also was a monster that couldn't be ignored. A red wyvern. A predator that was at the top of top-ranked monsters. On top of it, a strong young man came down. Master, Wu. I finally caught up. The young man shook his head. Then, he cleared his throat after seeing Serafina. He was certainly shy. Talk of the devil. Anyways, this is my disciple, Pendragon. Although he's second generation, I raised him after his parents died when he was young. You probably have seen him once. I think I have seen him in Malalan. If that attendant is a candidate, could you place this child also within the candidates? How could I take your disciple? Serafina took a step back. But, Hansung kept insisting. It's this child's hope rather than mine. When he was young, he said he fell greatly in love after seeing you. Although it might seem like I'm boasting about my disciple but Pendragon is considered strong wherever he is. He's handsome and has a great personality like me. The last part gets me the most. Either way, what do you think? If you're worried about His Holiness, you don't have to worry. Since the mother of all, Idea, has placed a blessing on him personally. Serafina looked at Pendragon surprisingly. Malalan served 4 gods. The god of clouds Sun, god of seas Ryung, god of earth Han, and their mother Idea. However, in reality, the true god was only Idea. The other 3 were served well because they were children of Idea. However, there were very few priests and paladins who gained Idea's power. Instead, if they were blessed with her powers, they exhibited tremendous power. You could tell by looking at the overwhelming proportion of those who became saints or sage kings by receiving Idea's blessing in the past. Nice to meet you. I'm Pendragon. Nice to meet you. I'm Serafina. Your name is unusual. It's the name my father gave me. Please allow me to become your first knight. Pendragon kneeled on one knee as his face became slightly rosy, and looked at Serafina with intense desire. It was hard for Serafina to reject Hansung's request. Hansung was a long-time friend of the Sage King and was also a benefactor of Malalan. The problem was Muyong. As long as Muyong was there, it was all just false hope. It would have been better to refuse him from the start, but to do that, she felt uncomfortable about Hansung. Serafina cautiously looked at Muyong. Nod. As Muyong gave permission, Serafina spoke. I understand. I'll place him as another candidate. However, I will judge fairly. That's what I wanted. Rather, it would be difficult if you didn't. Hansung was confident. The Dragon Hunter. As he didn't think the title was earned by himself. Even if he considered it, it was amazing, but Pendragon was also a tough opponent. Pendragon glanced at Muyong as he showed off his competitive spirit. Pendragon. Hansung's disciple. Thinking about it, I think there was one in the past. When Hansung was assassinated, Pendragon took the rest of the soldiers and rampaged. However, Muyong remembered him being instantly subjugated by the privileged class. Like Hansung, his sense of justice was high and he was truly a strong person. Ah well, it seems like Arkaza has interrupted your passage. I'll follow from above. Hansung read the countenance of Serafina's followers and left sneakily. It was to give Pendragon some more time with Serafina, as well. After Hansung left, Pendragon took an active approach. You're still beautiful. Thank you. Although I have only seen you once when I was young, I haven't forgotten you since. It's all thanks to you for me to serve Idea and receive her blessing. You're too kind. Muyong followed the two from a distance. Muyong wasn't really used to that sort of atmosphere. The Saintess's palace. It was a temple the size of a small city. Only priests and paladins lived in this place, numbering a few thousands. As Serafina, Hansung, Pendragon, and Muyong entered the temple, they quietly welcomed them. The saints had also heard the news already and ran out to greet them. A woman wore a crown adorned with world tree ornaments and a plain dress. Nice to meet you, Hansung Nim and Seraphinum. The woman was holiness itself. There was a mood that only true saints gave off. As if he had entered a thorny field, Muyong was totally uncomfortable. It might be because he had a tendency that didn't fit with this place. This is the start. However, Muyong didn't care. He couldn't avoid it just because it didn't match him. He had already entered the place of testing to become a first knight. Chapter 164, The God-Killing Spear, End. Translation, Te. Edit, Lee Suras. At that moment, Hansung withdrew a sizable sword fragment from his chest. Just a sword fragment. It had no other characteristics. The fact that it was so big suggested that it was a fragment of a large sword. However, it was strange. The power felt from the fragment was beyond imagination. Saintess of the Earth. Do you know what this item is? As Hansung handed over the sword fragment, the Saintess received it. The Saintess of the Earth had the power to know and feel anything that came from the earth. The Saintess shook her head after touching and looking at the fragment for a while. I do not know. I feel that this substance is not of this world. Hansung Nim, where did you obtain this? The King of the Dragons. I received it from him. And he asked me to go and find out who the owner of this fragment is. The King of the Dragons. The transcendental being that ruled all dragons. It was said that his power was easily comparable to the demon gods. He just didn't move. It was because he was the size of an enormous island, and whenever he moved, the entire earth trembled. If the king of the dragons requested it, then it was anything but a simple item. After thinking for a while, the saintess reluctantly gave an answer. Time. I feel countless streams of time in the fragment. Time, you say? Oh well, if the saintess doesn't know, then only the sage's room remains. Even though I promised I would never see those backroom elders again. Han Sung clucked his tongue and shook his head. But Myung was among the viewers of the fragment. For some reason that fragment was familiar. King Slayer. His sword. It was precisely a fragment of the sword he had. Why? For what reason did the king of the dragons have a fragment of King Slayer's sword? King Slayer had disappeared after teaching Myung about grains. Suddenly. As if he hadn't existed from the start. Myung also hadn't really looked for him. However, he had found traces of King Slayer in an unexpected place. Eventually, when Han Sung took a step back, only Seraphina remained. What kind of job do you have for me, Seraphinum? Seraphina turned her head. She looked at Pendragon, who was overflowing with confidence with his chest puffed up, and Myung, who acted as if he wasn't even there. For both of them, the test of the first night. First night. Ah, you're finally going to keep your mate. The saintess gave a sigh of relief as if it were her own business. They both knew each other very well since Seraphina had also been a candidate for saintess. And the truth that only Seraphina among the 7 cult judges had no first night so far was quite a promising story. The first night was also called a mate because it was only possible to keep one. There was a great deal of interest, even in Malalan, as to who would be Seraphina's mate. The saintess approached. Nice to meet you, saintess of Earth. I am Pendragon. Pendragon hit his chest with one hand. The saintess smiled at his confidence. A pleasure. You're quite manly. I can feel the earth welcoming you. Of course, since he is my student. Once again, Han Sung boasted about his student. At this point, even if he was a dimwit, it would have been okay. The saintess sighed and nodded her head. Ah, a disciple of the Dragon Lord. You are truly a blessing for humanity. I'm flattered. Haha. Pendragon frowned slightly at Han Sung. He didn't seem to be too pleased at the use of his teacher's title. Soon, the saintess reached out her right hand and touched Pendragon's forehead. Then, a light flowed out and his body's impurities were washed. His mind was cleared and the light in his eyes became increasingly intense. May the grace of the earth be with you. May the grace of the earth be with you. The saintess spoke, and Pendragon received it. It was the celebration and blessing that the saintess gave to the candidate for first night. Myung remained. The saintess moved her feet and stood before him. And the moment she looked into Myung's eyes, the saintess lost her words. An endless gaze. She couldn't distinguish between good and evil. Please tell me your name. A long time passed before she barely managed to ask. However, it was Seraphina that responded. Saintess, that person's name is Gale. He cannot speak well, so please be understanding. I understand. As if she understood, she raised her hand to Myung's forehead. May the grace of the earth be with you. Myung too was penetrated by the clear light. But no matter how much the energy came out, his eyes weren't cleaned or filled with vigor. They just stayed as they were. There was already nothing that could be called an impurity in Myung's body. It was because he had experienced multiple special awakenings and had expelled all bodily waste. Furthermore, thanks to great harmony, every cell of his body moved to create balance. Myung could release toxins from his body just by breathing alone. The saintess hesitated for a moment, then turned around. Well then, please follow me. There is a separate place where you can take the first night's test. The highly valued virtues for a first knight were purity, strength, and righteousness. If there was shortage of any of these three things, the first knight was disqualified. Naturally, purity was the purity of divine power. A nobler and more ceremonious form. It had nothing to do with quantity. No matter how little there was, if the purity was high, it could overturn everything. Of course, the first thing to check was precisely this purity. Although anyone who became a devotee had divine power, evil people never had high purity. You had to truly place your faith to be baptized more greatly. A transparent bead. A bead the size of an adult's head was placed in the center of the room. It's a bead that can measure the purity of divine power. If you put your divine power here, you can find out its purity. Pendragon took the lead in the saintess' explanation. I will try first. Taking the initiative. It was an attitude that did not fear a challenge. The saintess glowed and looked at Pendragon. If it was to that degree, even if he was to be compared to other first knights, he would not fall short. He hadn't taken the test yet, but the saintess saw that. Please place both hands on it. After that you will naturally be able to know what to do. As the saintess explained again, Pendragon put both hands on top of the bead. He had received the baptism of the mother of all, idea. It wasn't only the saintess that was curious about what degree of purity would appear, Serafina was quite curious as well. Swayayak. Soon, the bead was submerged in a bright light. Then, the light began to emerge from the bottom of the bead. It climbed past the center without stopping. When the light stopped shortly after, everyone had no choice but to be greatly surprised. 86%. The saintess was in awe. Because his purity was almost at the standard of a saintess. It was very rare for a man to have such a high purity. Serafina too looked at Pendragon as if seeing him anew. Pendragon swiped his nose. I guess it came out all right. It's not just okay. Even among saints you are worthy of being in the upper ranks. According to the purity of their divine power, women could become saintesses and men saints. Of course, a high purity alone did not guarantee becoming a saintess or saint, but that much meant that he had outstanding potential. Next, it was Muyung's turn. Muyung quietly approached the bead and placed his hands on it. Then, his back tickled. He forced his wings from popping out. It must be a device that induces divine power. The manifestation of divine power stimulated his wings. Muyung inwardly clicked his tongue. After roughly figuring out the usage of the bead, Muyung poured his divine power in. Waak! It was a bright light that couldn't even be compared to Pendragon's. Although it was a small amount, but it was enough to blind everyone. At the same time, the bead was filled up. It passed halfway in an instant, and passed 70%, 80%, and 90%. Seeing that, everyone excluding Muyung's eyes glazed over in astonishment. When the light finally stopped, the entire bead was brightly heating up. 99.9. Unfortunately, it didn't fill it completely. However, no one was disappointed. It was a phenomenal figure. He had far exceeded the human limit of 89%. Was this possible? The saintess looked at Muyung. Serafina also turned her attention to him. However, the reaction of the two gradually changed. The saintess was unable to believe it, and Serafina was able to feel a bit of relief. He is an angel. The purity didn't lie. No one but angels had a purity this high. If he was called a god, it could be believed. The doubts she had up until now waned all at once. When the doubts vanished, a sense relief was formed. On the contrary, she felt sorry to Muyung. My goodness! The saintess sputtered in continuous disbelief. This hadn't happened in decades. She had never seen a human with this much purity before. However, one had now appeared before her eyes. Is the bead broken? It was a joke. The saintess too knew that the bead would never break. All the priests, saintesses, saints and the Sage King had poured their heart and souls into making it. Is that figure possible? Pendragon immediately frowned and asked. He had been certain of his victory. 86% was easily saint level. Who would think he would lose while having that degree of purity? But he had lost. By a wide margin, at that. He didn't believe it. Even the Dragon Lord was silent. It can't be. That's the established theory. The saintess told the truth. 89% had never been exceeded before. She had never seen it. The bead measured purity, but over 90% had been a purely imaginary area. As there was no one to compare him with, the comparison was meaningless. It was probably natural for distrust to come in. Pendragon glared at Myung once and said, "Please prepare for the next test. The next test will take place when the moon comes out. First, I will guide you to the palace where you can rest." The saintess put her hand on her forehead. Her face began to glow as if it was on fire. If this was true, it was a serious matter. She had to report it to the Sage King immediately. The saintess looked at Serafina. Serafina shook her head. And she slightly changed the shape of her mouth. "Please don't report for now," Serafina was saying. The accommodations assigned to Myung were quite large. Myung was quietly sitting on the bed. Is this Gabriel's influence? He was going to adjust accordingly. However, it seemed like purity wasn't something that could be controlled. Lord Class, Archangel. Furthermore, it was the power of the Archangel Gabriel. There was no way that the power to only pursue justice could be hidden. It was even strong enough to make Lucifer stay quiet. Knock, knock. Soon, someone knocked on the door. From the sound of the footsteps, it was Serafina. "Enter." "Kriake." The door opened, and as expected, it was Serafina. Serafina was dressed lightly. In a white dress he had never seen before. Plop. Then she came straight toward Myung and knelt before him. "Please forgive my foolishness, for not recognizing you as the great person you are. It's good enough if you've realized it now. I will cut out these two eyes, which were full of doubt. If that will make you forgive me." Serafina pulled out a short dagger. When she tried to stab herself in the eyes without flinching, Myung kicked her in the stomach. Ugh! With a sound, Serafina fell to her side. Gasp! The dagger fell to the floor. Myung stood up and looked down at Serafina. "Do not thoughtlessly harm yourself." "Then, what should I do about this distrust? We have plenty of time. You can pay it off slowly." Gabriel was also the angel of mercy. Serafina was also a talented person, capable of helping in many ways. He couldn't let her die like this. He shouldn't let her thoughts run wild here. Myung immediately changed the subject. "In order to keep the demon gods in check, I need the god-killing spear. You know this as well." "Yes, the god-killing spear is on Suicide Hill. Currently, numerous priests and paladins are on their way there." Serafina told the truth as it was. She did not seem to be hiding more. However, Suicide Hill? The moment he heard the name, Myung felt as if he had been hit in the head with a hammer. The place where Diabolo's altar is. He hadn't thought that perhaps the god-killing spear would be there. That wasn't all. Snow. That was also the place where she called Myung. Chapter 165, The Dragon Lord, 1. Translation, Te. Edit, Ren. He got goosebumps. For the first time Myung felt something like an unavoidable destiny. Perhaps Snow had somehow foreseen this moment from the beginning and called him. In any case, he was going to Suicide Hill. Snow. In the past she had been the strongest saintess, but while she had been famous, she wasn't that big of a deal from Myung's standpoint. He just had questions regarding her birth. She was not a human being and furthermore, she wasn't any other species, and definitely not an angel, People called her Veil in secret. The reason she called for me. He was uneasy. If she had read everything and called Myung, then she would indeed be called a great prophetess. She was so detailed that she couldn't be compared to shamans. However, that fundamental reason was mysterious and uncomfortable. And if she read the truth about his returning to the past? It's dangerous. Yes. Maybe Snow would be more dangerous than anyone else to Myung. Myung had become strong. He was getting stronger, faster than anyone. It was possible because he had survived based on his memories or experience of the past. If Snow turned hostile, it would also be possible for her to know what Myung would do in the future. If Myung now knew about the result as he aimed for Wang Chunglin, the difficulty would be much lower. He even kept the worst possible situation in mind. Snow had certainly been helpful to Myung, but it was too sweet to interpret that help as mere courtesy. Yes, sweet. Myung was not foolish enough to just gobble up the sweet food. There was a reason for everything. It was correct to believe that Snow wanted something from Myung. Also, he had to think about if what she wanted from him was not accomplished. He sharpened a sword in his mind. This sword would never be dulled until he perfectly learned Snow's intentions. However, because you became the first knight, moving will be comfortable. I'm not doubting Myung Nim's abilities, but because it's in that place, many will be watching. I'm planning for that, Myung answered shortly. Relief then filled Serafina's eyes. She had come prepared to gouge out both her eyes, but Myung had stopped her. The method might have been a bit violent, but hadn't he said that? Hope loves us. However, that expression was extreme. What does the next test entail? Myung's eyes penetrated Serafina. Pendragon. Myung didn't know if Pendragon had been Serafina's first knight in the past. However, right now, Myung needed that position. He didn't know if Pendragon had done anything important with this position in the past, but to the best of his knowledge nothing like that had happened. Above all, more so than the first knight, his title as the Dragon Lord Hansung's student was stronger. Thus, Myung intended to do his best to seize the position, like a lion that put all his strength into catching a rabbit. Hearing the challenge beforehand was a foul, but what did that matter? He just wanted to save a little time if it seemed he was winning anyway. I will watch your military technique. A first knight must be able to wield all weapons, Serafina explained frankly. It was not too difficult. Myung used a basic sword, but in reality he had handled everything that could be considered military. I remember fighting with a ladle. Now, it was all a past affair. The memory of being caught infiltrating a kitchen while in disguise and fighting with a ladle resurfaced. He smiled a little. The fact that he could recall the past and smile was proof that he could afford to. I am walking a different road. He didn't know what would be at the end of this road. At least he wouldn't live a life being dragged around, like in the past. He lifted a bow. He quickly shot the target. A total of 20 targets flew around in the air. It was a fight where the person who quickly shot those 20 targets would win. Twang! Twang! Myung gently tugged the bowstring to test its elasticity. The elasticity is good. Sentiment due for critical. He became one with the sword and it was called all flows become one. In the end, it meant that the use of all weapons was similar. If he wanted to, there was no reason he couldn't handle a sword or bow. Gale Nim, Pendragon Nim. Well. Please start. Gale was Myung's alias. Gabriel was roughly Gale when abbreviated. As the sane test signaled, Pendragon pulled the bowstring first. Twoong. Thud. He hit the target perfectly in the center. As the target fell, Pendragon shrugged his shoulders, as if that much was nothing. While doing that, he looked at Myung. Myung was his biggest rival. However, Myung merely performed his own tasks silently. Myung loaded the bow with 2 arrows. I'd be no match for the cursed bow team that specialized in archery, but There were many organizations within the Forest of Death. Each was divided into specialized fields and trained intensively on the associated weapons. The Cursed Bow Team was a group of assassins that wielded bows. They fundamentally fired 3 arrows simultaneously and they never missed a target. Muyoung's limit was 2 arrows. Starting from 3 arrows, his accuracy fell. Shushug. Thursday thud. Each time, 2 arrows flew and stuck in the targets. A momentous event. Seeing that, Pendragon's expression hardened. Who the hell is he? How could that guy be a seed? Originally he had thought that becoming the first knight would not be difficult. Even if Dragon Lord Hansung's name was removed, Pendragon was certainly powerful. Not to mention the purity of his divine power, and he spared nothing in becoming stronger. He'd come this far through really bone-cutting training. However, a strange bum suddenly popped up. His entire body was covered with armor and a helmet, but he didn't even look old. He was Pendragon's age at the most, or maybe a little older. And no matter how slow-witted Pendragon was, he had no choice but to notice at this point the truth that Serafina regarded Muyoung favorably. I can't lose. Pendragon's eyes were ablaze. He had been just a child at the time, but he had seen Serafina and fallen for her. Whenever times were hard, he would think of her and spur on his training. It was only to be her first. However, thud. He didn't know about others, but he couldn't be beaten by Muyoung. 18 weapons. It was about 18 varieties of weapons and their martial arts. Generally, weapon types did not deviate from these 18 varieties. There were 18 kinds of tests. Muyoung dealt with more than 10 weapons, never missing a single one. As if he was an old expert, he naturally shot and suppressed Pendragon. Normally it would require 10 years to be able to properly handle a weapon. There was no one that could handle 18 weapons like that. This was what normal people thought universally. You're strong. The Dragon Lord Hansung. He was carefully observing Muyoung immediately after what had happened yesterday. He was powerful, to the point of easily ranking as one of the strong. However, for some reason there was something unsettling about him. It seemed as if that wouldn't be all. However, it seemed impossible to draw out Muyoung's sincerity through Pendragon. Someone like him existed. Hansung had stepped in immediately after humans began being summoned to the underworld. The war with the demon gods, the eradication of the monsters and the establishment of the city, there was nothing Hansung hadn't been involved in. Even so, he had never seen anyone like Muyoung before. If Hansung, who knew most strong men very well, didn't know him, then it meant that no one knew him. Serafina, where did you find that guy? I was lucky. Serafina was stingy with her words. In the meanwhile, Muyoung ran through a succession of victories and came out. Pendragon's appearance passed red and gradually became ashen. Overwhelming skill. Pendragon was still young and was unable to accept it easily. He's like someone who just fell from the sky. Maybe. Maybe? Oh ho, Serafina. Women with many secrets can't receive love. That's okay. I'm just the faithful sort. The faithful sort belonged to the side that gave rather than received. Serafina's attention was on Muyoung. In no time, it was the 17th match. It was a confrontation between a spear and a spear. Using only a spear to battle 10 masters of spearmanship. A spear. Muyoung turned the spear in his grasp and looked at it. Then he ran towards the masters, as if he had an adequate understanding. He pierced them like a bolt of lightning and shed their attacks like water as he severed their pulses one by one. They didn't die, but many of them fell before Muyoung's spear. Muyoung never did things simply. Amazing. It isn't an easy matter to handle all weapons that way, Hansung marveled. No skills had been used. It was all the more surprising that he showed such an image through pure spearmanship alone. Eventually, the 17th round, the spear match, was also lost by Pendragon. The last was, the sword. The sword was a battle between the two. Muyeong and Pendragon stood face to face. It will not be as easy as the sword. He had already lost. While handling 17 weapons, he had already lost, so winning only the sword would not make him a winner. But Pendragon couldn't easily accept it. You're still young. Dragon Lord Hansung shook his head as he saw the scene. Like his age, Pendragon was full of youthful vigor. He knew how to run forward. But, he was slow at accepting. When you're young, most can't help but act that way. Eventually, the sparring began. Muyeong closed his eyes and raised the sword. Pendragon ran forward as if he was crazy. Then, when Pendragon was only a short distance away, Muyeong opened his eyes, and aiming at only one point with the sword, he attacked. Kwajek! Sword and sword clashed together. Soon, cracks began to appear on Pendragon's sword. Pshhhhhhh. When the cracks became severe, it turned to powder and disappeared onto the ground. Just one collision. He had used no magical powers, divine powers, or skills, but Pendragon's attacks were still futile. It seemed Muyeong didn't even have to mix the sword. Muyeong turned around nonchalantly. This is fraud. This can't happen. Pendragon shouted desperately. No wonder. Excluding Hansung, Muyeong was the first wall he had encountered. Furthermore, it was a wall that stood strong while blocking his dreams. How could he not be upset? Hansung looked at him. The level isn't right. Pendragon was strong. However, his opponent was too powerful. It was just that different. But the final thing he saw was unusual even for Hansung. Swordsmanship that destroyed the sword itself. Can I be the target for the next sword match? Hansung asked the Saintess. Then he took a stance that made the Saintess awkward. Hansung Nim? But the results are already. Hansung nodded his head. I know. I'm not trying to change the results. My student lost because he was weak. However, the winner seems disappointed to end it this way. What? The Saintess wondered, but Hansung had only spoken to be courteous. Hansung approached Muyeong. Then Muyeong stopped walking. While you were completing the test, you kept throwing speculation my way. You probably know who I am, but now I am interested in you as well. Hansung's reason for this was simple. He wanted to take off that mask and see. Moreover, it was also true that Muyeong continued to cause Hansung to speculate about him. Up until now he had been ignoring him, but not anymore. Muyeong watched Hansung from inside the helmet. And he smiled slowly, from the corner of his mouth. Caught B Chapter 166. Chapter 166, The Dragon Lord, 2. Translation, Te. Edit, Lee Suris. Muyeong had been uninterested in Pendragon from the start. Pendragon was strong, but not to a level where Muyeong was worried about him. In any case, it seemed that Muyeong's victory was decided, and he knew that no matter how desperate Pendragon was, he was grossly inferior. However, Pendragon's teacher was different. The Dragon Lord Hansung. The closest man to humanity's strongest person. He was in a godlike territory, especially when he fought with dragons. It was said that even the demon kings spared themselves when he approached. Even Muyeong had only been able to assassinate him after 3 years because he had been fortunate. At the time he had been tired and exhausted. However, I want to challenge him. Instead of an assassination, he wanted to have a fair fight. That was why he continuously threw speculation during the fight with Pendragon. It was to elicit a response from Hansung. Also, by the looks of it, Hansung had been caught. The complete defeat of his student. No matter how uninterested he had been, he now had no choice but to be interested. You're certainly strong. However, you are too arrogant. Hansung also completely read Muyeong's intentions. And he could get a sense of Muyeong's boundless confidence. Such confidence against him, the Dragon Lord. Of course it was better than nothing, but it was excessive. There were many times when doing too much was worse than doing nothing at all. Pendragon was just a rookie. On the other hand, Muyong was a master. Han Sung had felt that Muyong was one of a kind ever since the first time he had met him. Experts can't hide all their strength even if they tried. It was more easily recognizable to someone like Han Sung. If he moderated his movements and regulated even his heartbeat, then he could never be ordinary. An outrageous purity of divine power. He was a supernova that appeared from who knew where, but Han Sung was called a monarch because he was undefeated. Sword fragment. Muyong said shortly. The sword fragment Han Sung had showed the Saintess. Something thought to belong to Kingslayer. You mean that if you win, I'm to give you the sword fragment? Thud. Muyong's response was clear. Han Sung tilted the corners of his lips. If his self-confidence was to this extent, it surpassed unpleasantness and was fun. Since it wasn't like he never received this kind of challenge because he was the Dragon Lord. Fine. However, if I win, what will you give me? Traditionally, favorable bets had to be made on both sides. The Dragon Lord alone couldn't bet the sword fragment. Then Muyong withdrew the sage's potion from his chest. Oh, I see. If it's the sage's potion, it's a bit tempting. The sage's potion was worth calling the bet. They were so extremely rare that even some large groups did not even possess a few. It was enough to support the very best prospects. Han Sung did not have a place for enemies. In other words, there was a limit to the supply and demand of sage's potions. Without a doubt, there would be a few of Pendragon's stats that weren't even enlightened. For the love of his student. Fine. I accept. He had no choice but to bite. In any case, he had no thoughts of losing. Then Han Sung shook his head. Saintess Nim, can you keep the process and outcome of this fight a secret? All right. Only the Saintess, Serafina, Muyong, Han Sung, and Pendragon were inside the large castle. If the fight with Han Sung started, it was highly possible that priests and paladins would gather. Since they would also want to see a fight with the man who was closest to being humanity's strongest. However, the current Han Sung didn't want to be seen by any others. After the chaos had passed and his true character as a hero was revealed, only then, not now. Before becoming a hero, while I exist utterly as Han Sung. He had the thought that he wanted to fight with him and make his own light shine distinctly. Muyong lifted his head and withdrew anguish. Swung! Anguish cried. A battle of pure swordsmanship. Even so, the skills that Muyong was able to use were only acceleration and grains. He couldn't use any skill dealing with death here, and the other skills were too distinctive. Muyong had become famous as an angel precisely because of skills like those. On the other hand, Muyong's equipment and such were not so well known. Win. Muyong certainly had no thoughts of losing. Of course this would be a difficult fight. An opponent who he might lose or win against even if he used all he had. If so, he put a restriction on himself. However, the same was true for Han Sung. Han Sung's true character appeared when he was with Arkaza. The magical dragon Arkaza was not here. Well then, let's start. Han Sung held dual swords. He was a master of dual-wielding swordsmanship. Also, he was the owner of 3 types of secret classes. Contractor of Dragons, Master of 100 Swords, and Iron Knight. Furthermore, all 3 of them had synergetic effects on each other. Muyong and Han Sung stared at each other for a while. Nobody moved first. Hundreds and thousands of scenarios were rising up in Muyong's mind. What path and speed should he use, and how he should penetrate? Or how to defend? He was searching for the most optimal one. The same went for Han Sung. I thought you would jump at me to your heart's content. It was a surprise. Muyong was concentrating extremely. More carefully than anyone else. When Muyong had first thrown speculation at him, Han Sung had seen him as just a power-drunk and arrogant fellow, but after entering a fight with him, he realized that it was just a display. He just wanted me to respond. Quite so. Han Sung looked at Myung again. And if that were true, then he couldn't lose this fight even more. Han Sung decided to take it a little more seriously. And he read one among thousands of cases. I found it. Han Sung found a way a step faster than Myung. He slightly lowered his upper body and wielded his swords with both hands. The wind resistance was minimal, and in the blink of an eye he was standing in front of Myung. And, like it was nothing, he naturally invaded Myung's territory. There was no knock on the door. Indeed, an entry without warning. The rhythm is different. Myung stepped back with a frown. He attacked without warning and invaded his space. Usually, he would not suffer, but Han Sung's rhythm was different to normal people. He was able to tell with just one glance. Chiik. His armor was scratched. It was light because of his dramatic response. If he had been a little late he would have lost his waist. The corner of Myung's mouth quivered. Han Sung was facing him sincerely. He was truly trying to kill Myung. He certainly didn't know how to do things in moderation. This is fun. Myung immediately launched a counterattack. He swung Anguish horizontally. Tchk. Han Sung blocked it with a sword, but a crack appeared. One of the twin swords soon burst into light. He hit the grain in anticipation of his reaction. But Han Sung brushed off his hands as if it were nothing. Then another sword was created. The sword he used in the beginning was just a tangible sword. The master of 100 swords. As the words suggested, he was carrying 100 types of swords. However, there was no real shape, and when a skill was used, the intangible sword was able to take shape and be manifested to the world. However, he seemed somewhat surprised. Myung certainly had a rhythm that was different to ordinary people. His body's rhythm, sensation, everything. In a moment, Han Sung's figure disappeared. A blind spot. Myung immediately threw himself sideways. Thud. However, Han Sung's plan was the place where Myung threw himself. Myung was hit in the foot and his body was pinned to a palace pillar. Myung dusted off his head and stood up. A match of pure swordsmanship. It wasn't enough for them to just be 1 or 2 steps ahead. In the end, it was a fight of how many steps they thought of ahead. In terms of simple skills, Han Sung was slightly superior. It could be said that Han Sung had the upper hand in swordsmanship itself. Rather than hack and slash, he had a sense for swordsmanship. However, Myung had one shot. Myung's attacks were all fatal. With only one shot it was possible for him to overturn everything. Han Sung was realizing this instinctively. Because of that, he was taking caution in attacking in order not to allow him to counterattack. It's like fighting a gigantic steel giant. Among Alexandro's trials, if he was to point out the most difficult thing, it would certainly be the triathlon with the steel giant. In that place, Myung lost countlessly. However, he continuously challenged it. It was fun and rewarding. That was the case with the current fight. Myung spoke. Let's do this properly. He stretched his neck both ways while properly grasping Anguish. He was done testing the waters. The Saintess, Serafina, and Pendragon could not believe the present situation. That he was a human that could fight on even ground with Han Sung. Even so, Serafina was less shocked. Because she firmly believed that Myung was an angel. On the contrary, it was to the extent that she thought he could win against even Han Sung if he spread his wings. On the other hand, Pendragon's pupils shook violently. He's fighting on even ground with teacher. If it was with that level of ability, then he'd had no hope from the beginning. Simply put, like trying to break a rock with an egg. Even if he hit it 100 times, the rock would not break. Pendragon was an egg. Myung was a gigantic boulder. He realized that now. Mortification, shame, and numerous mixed emotions dominated his body. However, Pendragon watched Serafina. Serafina did not take her eyes off of Muyong. She watched his every move. She seemed totally oblivious of Pendragon's gaze. I lost. He acknowledged it. He had to. What would be the point of becoming the first knight? In the end he wouldn't be able to win Serafina's heart. He had been angry during the fight, but if there was this level of a skill gap, he would only have been ridiculous. Serafina's cheeks were flushed. She was not a woman who had fallen in love. She was too expressionless for that. She was just concentrating. She was thinking that in this world, there was only Muyong. Perhaps she had even forgotten that Pendragon existed. What Muyong was showing was to the extent that even if it was simple swordsmanship it was enough to overwhelm everything. To do more, it was pointless. Pendragon bowed his head. It was a long time since he had felt this sense of defeat. Tears gathered slightly in his eyes. They were tears that marked the end of his first love. I will become stronger. Pendragon wiped his eyes and looked back at the progress of the battle. Finally, the fight was drawing to a close. Muyong had shattered around 90 of the swords Hansung carried. He wielded 100, but he was almost at his limit. Muyong's flow was certainly abnormal. Because he suddenly got faster or slower. Even so, Hansung didn't collapse. On the contrary, he cornered Muyong more fiercely and stabbed at his whole body. His suit of armor was already in tatters. Schwag! Finally, he cut even his helmet. However, only the corner of his mouth was exposed. He was laughing. Anyone could see that Hansung had the upper hand. In reality, Muyong was slowly getting closer to using all of his strength. Someone who is enjoying it can't be beat. Pendragon gritted his teeth. He was sincerely enjoying the fight. Quag! Muyong was not just suffering. In his half-collapsed state, anguish had pierced Hansung's thigh. Hansung also gave Muyong's shoulder a long cut. After this, they began to slash at each other. They both got back up like Daruma dolls. Half a day passed since then. Amazing! How much had they fought? As if Hansung was pleased, his teeth showed when he laughed. Blood covered their eyes. Their entire bodies were in tatters. A case where it wouldn't be strange even if they both died. No one could stop them. Because it seemed that the moment they stopped fighting, an even greater harm would occur. Because they were both standing at sword point. It was not a fight that ended when one side stopped. Muyong didn't answer. No, he didn't have the energy to respond. Thud. They both collapsed simultaneously. Chapter 167, The Dragon Lord, End. Translation, Te. Edit, Lee Suras. A fight that had lasted about a day and a half. Everyone was silent. It was unbelievable. Meanwhile, the Dragon Lord Hansung and a nameless man fought to a standstill. Something that couldn't happen, that shouldn't happen, was happening before them. Gulp. How? The Saintess was the first to speak. She carefully approached them. The Dragon Lord was like a symbol to humanity. If even one person found out that someone like that was defeated, many people would be shaken. However, it might be different if his opponent was worthy of representing humanity. Therefore, she had to be sure. Chiak! Serafina stopped the Saintess when she tried to remove Muyong's helmet. Saintess Nim, I will treat my seed. I entrust Hansung Nim to you. Ah. That's right. First pray for healing. The Saintess couldn't come to her senses. It was because she too had certainly thought that Hansung was humanity's strongest for a long time. Pendragon was merely standing and staring vacantly. Gasp! It was at that time. Hansung sat up. It was because the dragon's powerful magic flowed through Hansung's body and healed him. Actually, the regenerative power was beyond imagination thanks to Arcaz's magic, and unless Hansung's throat or heart were pierced, he would not die. Tui. Hansung spat out the dead blood. And he unsteadily got to his feet. He is a monster-like guy. It was Hansung's admiration of Muyong. Where had a monster like this been born? If not for Arkaza's magic, he would have had to devote months to his recovery. It had been 10 years since the dragon's skin and regenerative powers had been activated. As Hansung took a step forward, Serafina blocked him again. I will take care of my seed. I'm not trying to see his face. You and this man called Gale seem to be hiding something, but, fortunately it seems like he is recovering on his own. Hansung had only gotten close to Muyong to check his condition. A small light appeared over Muyong's entire body. Divine powers and healing skills had been automatically activated and were healing his body. However, the light was weak. It was because he had used recovery generously during their fight. Ha! Hansung smirked inwardly. The recovery skill Muyong used was not recovery, but almost to the point of restoration. He'd used it about 5 times, but each time he did his attacks became more vicious. Since then, he'd thought that Muyong was running out of divine power, but meanwhile, it seemed that he had been filled up little by little. It wasn't only the purity that was high. His ability to regenerate divine power was also exceptional. How could he not be called a monster? Teacher. You won. Pendragon hesitantly ran over. His previously vacant expression had suddenly disappeared. He looked relieved, if anything. However, Hansung shook his head. If he had only a little more divine power remaining, I would have been defeated. No. Then, he put his hand on his forehead and sighed. Had he won? Could he seriously say that he had won? It was uncomfortable. It was as if Muyong had not revealed his abilities. Of course, that was also true for Hansung. Because he had not been with Arkaza, and he hadn't used the aces up his sleeve either. Techniques such as sword key blades or storm surge. Because it was a battle of pure swordsmanship, he didn't use them. He only used basic skills that assisted with swordsmanship. However, Hansung was the Dragon Lord. With the name of Lord he always had to be overwhelming. But they achieved the idea of a draw. Even if each of them was concealing considerable power, it was no excuse. Hansung shut his eyes. As a result, it could not be said that he had won this fight. Furthermore, during their fight, Hansung had missed Muyong multiple times. Soon, Hansung spoke heavily. I lost. Muyong opened his eyes. He frowned at the bright light coming through the window. Amazing. As he raised his upper body, he pondered his last memories. He could remember up to both him and Hansung falling with great injuries. It seemed that he had lost consciousness after that. However, when he recalled the fight with the Dragon Lord, he felt strange. The Dragon Lord hadn't put his heart into it. That had not been all of the power of the Dragon Lord Hansung that Muyong remembered. He was someone that had command of sword key blades, which overlaid powerful energy on his sword, and storm surge that freely sent 100 swords flying simultaneously. However, Muyong also hadn't shown his true power. No powers associated with darkness had been used. He'd only used up to 8 times acceleration. Muyong was able let time flow at a maximum of 16 times acceleration, however he had only used half. Of course, even if they used all they had, the probability of Muyong winning wasn't even 30%. If Arkaza appeared and Hansung used Storm Surge, and Muyong used all the undead to attack, his winning rate would be less than 30%. So that the idea of them both collapsing could only be amazing. Arkaza is a dragon that can't be compared to Barca. Barca, who he had hunted with the dwarves, was a much younger dragon. On the other hand, Arkaza was one of the most powerful of the adult dragons. She was beyond comparison. Muyong smiled faintly. Anyway, it had been a legitimate battle, and not an assassination. If Muyong had been victorious here, he would have been disappointed instead. However, Muyong cleanly acknowledged it. He had lost. Han Sung was as strong as ever, tenacious, and a wall-like being. Indeed, he was worthy of the hero title. Although he had been brainwashed, he could still remember the 3 years he'd had Han Sung under surveillance. Myung was the only one in the world that knew the struggles and complications Han Sung had endured. Hero material. Wasn't he such an amazing man whether 40 years before or after? However, it did not seem that he would be forever impossible to surpass. Because Myung's growth rate far surpassed their imagination. And not only Han Sung, but the day where he could deal with Arkaza at the same time was surely coming. You've awoken. Shortly afterwards, the door opened and Serafina entered. There was a bowl filled with water and a towel in her hands. She sat beside him with natural grace. Then, she dipped the towel into the water and squeezed it out. What are you doing? You've sweated a lot. I will wipe it off for you. Serafina carefully wiped Myung's upper body. Wipe. Wipe. A brief pause. To have someone cleaning him was unfamiliar. Then Myung asked. How did the trial of the first night go? You passed. The Saintess will send the formal documents of affirmation to you. By the time we get to Suicide Hill everything will be completed. Okay. Excuse me, but your arm, please. Myung held out his right arm. The feeling of the towel coming up carefully against his side wasn't too bad. Han Sung, how is he? He recovered quickly and was wielding a sword in the palace yesterday. If he had the magical dragon Arkaza's magical powers, Myung would have recovered soon after he lost consciousness. His heart raced. If he was wielding a sword in yesterday's palace, it meant that he was reliving the fight with Myung. He must have also gained something from Myung. As expected, Myung had also gained a little enlightenment from Han Sung's swordsmanship. I have to get up. Are you okay? Your body is still. My body has fully recovered. The divine blessing had automatically manifested. Thanks to that, his body itself was unencumbered. A new suit of armor and helmet hung on the wall of the room. As Myung turned his head to look at them, Serafina said. Don't worry. No one saw your face. She had stayed up all night by his side while he slept. She had protected him in case someone tried to investigate Myung. Myung nodded and raised his body up in bed. There is a lot of time left until I find the god-killing spear. A productive use of the time came to mind. Let's fight once more. Myung, who had searched the castle, said when he saw Han Sung. Han Sung, who was wielding a sword, furrowed his brows. Come to think of it, didn't they say you weren't good at speaking? That meant you only talk when you want to. Myung searched in his chest. Then he withdrew the sage's potion. Take it. Did you think you lost yesterday's fight? Yes. No. I lost. So you don't have to give me the potion. With a shake of his head, Han Sung withdrew the sword fragment from his chest. However, Myung didn't take it. The reward was granted only to the winner. However, Myung had completely lost yesterday's fight. I lost. Oh ho! It was I that lost. Neither of them broke their stubbornness. It was a stance of acknowledging personal defeat, but neither of them gave an inch. I fell first. We fell simultaneously. The person to rise first was definitely you. It wasn't me, it was because of Arkaza's magical powers. Yeah, one didn't use your full power. Yet? Your words are a little short. Isn't that the same for you anyway? I lost. My words aren't getting through to you. Han Sung clicked his tongue with a shake of his head. However, his lips lifted in a slight smile. I have no choice. I have to fight again and make a decision. Han Sung too was just remembering yesterday's fight. Myung's fight was the type that Han Sung had not been able to experience. It was so gruesome and aggressive. I won't use any skills. Do you mean to fight purely? Another rule was set yesterday. Myung nodded his head. This is fun. Hansung summoned a sword. This time it was not a dual sword. 10 swords appeared, then merged together. 10 swords. When 100 swords were combined, finally the real 100 swords was completed. That was the true meaning of 100 swords. Among them, the 10 swords was used. The fact that he revealed this sword meant he acknowledged Muyong as a true opponent. This was certainly a different attitude from yesterday. But I can choose the sword I will use, right? Thud. Muyong consented and pulled out Anguish. Swung. Anguish cried out increasingly louder. More than 10 days passed in the palace. Muyong fought every day. He clashed blades with Hansung. And every day he grew in a different way. Pure growth that was not assisted by anything. Hansung was astonished by Muyong's appearance, which changed daily. However, he didn't try to see Muyong's face. He displayed no signs of being even curious about it. Muyong wondered why he did not. 10 days passed, then Muyong asked. Aren't you curious about who I am? I am not curious. Why was that? Muyong's eyes asked. Hansung chuckled. In my life, I meet many types of people. There is little point in trying to find out about people that are just passing by. And there is no point in deliberately trying to find out about people I will meet continuously. Because I will naturally get to know them anyways. Which type are you? For the first time, Muyong understood Hansung's words. Hansung was thinking of Muyong as someone he will meet continuously. If they walked a similar path, they would continue to meet. Of course the day would come when he would naturally get to know Muyong, but there was no need to force it for a moment's curiosity. Hansung watched the sunset outside of the palace. Flop. Flop. Finally, Arkiza descended from the sky with a flap of her wings. Hansung slowly climbed on top of Arkiza. I have to leave now. I have to go to the sage's room and find out about what the king of the dragons asked of me. Is this necessary? Muyong had already received the sword fragment from Hansung. Muyong had also handed over the sage's potion to Hansung. The sword fragment had somehow become part of their barter, but was it not an item that was necessary in order to solve what the king of the dragons asked? The fact that Hansung had given it to him so coolly bothered him. I made a rough copy. As he wasn't really concerned, Hansung waved his hand. Then, the shape of the sword fragment was created in his hand. In a manner similar to the 100 swords, he was even able to create a copy of the sword fragment. It wasn't 100%, but he could create an imitation that was 80 to 90% accurate. It's not perfect, but there should be no problem investigating. Also, Hansung turned his head. People, led by Pendragon, were running over from far away. My disciple is quite obsessive. Just don't kill him. Kurariung. Arkiza gave a short cry. Shwa-ayak. When she flapped her wings, a strong gust of winds shook the surroundings. Finally, just as how he had arrived, the Dragon Lord Hansung left like a wind. Of course, he didn't just go. Next time we will have a proper fight, he mouthed. A proper fight. Even though he didn't want to, that's what he thought. Win or lose, next time he would face him properly. So Hansung also had to show everything. Someday. Definitely. Muyong clenched his fist tightly. Translator's notes. 1 Yat. In Korean, the honorific/polite word for you is dangshin. In this sentence, Muyong used the very informal neo. Hansung therefore noted that Muyong had spoken a bit shortly, meaning informally. I couldn't think of any other way to represent that in English, so please forgive the cringe of Yat. Crying Face, Chapter 168, Forest of Death, 1. Translation, Nadu. Edit, Lee Suras. After Hansung left, Pendragon made a devastating expression. I know that he normally gets restless, but I never thought he would leave without a word. The Dragon Lord Hansung wasn't the type of person who stayed at one place for very long. He roamed all around the underworld to be called someone with wanderlust. Since he had earned about 3 secret classes, one could get an idea on how many adventures he's been on with knowing that alone. Pendragon turned his head and looked at Serafina. Master wanted me to experience the world. Will you allow me to accompany you for a while? However, it seemed like he wasn't discouraged. Instead, he looked at it as another opportunity and made another plan. Serafina laughed awkwardly. It was already decided for Muyong to become the first knight. The only position that could influence cult judges. However, Pendragon didn't care about that anymore. Although he didn't earn the position, he was going to earn true love. Pendragon was young. He was high-spirited. He also had a big dream. He was also not the type of man to be discouraged by one defeat. If he was that sort of person, he wouldn't have been able to become Hansung's disciple. Although Muyong got the first knight position, he was all fired up to gain Serafina's true love. Muyong shrugged his shoulders. Hansung's disciple. There was definitely something to gain from him too. This is good. Muyong fought with Hansung 10 days and nights. Using only pure technique. Hansung's swordsmanship wasn't structured, but it was completely strong. A master that forgot the formulas because he fought so much. To be honest, Muyong's swordsmanship was no more than a copy of Sword 1 and Kingslayer's. Mixing the skills he learned while at the Forest of Death, his attacks were very aggressive, but there were some parts that were lacking. He found out about his limits in his one-sided attacks with Hansung. I want to make my own swordsmanship. Simply earning skills and raising stats wasn't everything. The basics. The pillars must be strong and high for the building to be built higher. Following Sword 1 and Kingslayer, Muyong wanted Hansung's swordsmanship. And Pendragon was the one who was most influenced by Hansung's swordsmanship. Since copying was the mother of imitations, Muyong was planning to create his own swordsmanship by analyzing Hansung and Pendragon's swordsmanship. I never thought that a swordsmanship under my name would appear. Muyong grinned at the thought of what happened a few days ago. After fighting with Hansung, he wielded his sword a few times under the moonlight to get a little enlightenment. Perhaps you could say Muyong was relaxed by the moon. And suddenly, for the first time, a skill related to swordsmanship had appeared. Skill name, Muyong's swordsmanship. Muyong's unique swordsmanship that he has started to make on his own. It is currently incomplete, and when it's completed, its rank will be decided depending on the result. There wasn't much explanation. But, the fact that it was incomplete was important. Muyong was slowly completing a swordsmanship in his name. Through the fight with Hansung, Muyong gained a lot of inspiration. The sage's potion he exchanged for it was definitely worth it. Since Muyong had gained a piece of Kingslayer's sword. Muyong, who was looking at the sword piece, changed his gaze. Hansung left. Pendragon was the only one left. Pendragon Nim, Muyong is already decided as the first knight. I know. I am not planning to compete against him. I'm just another house guest is here. I need the approval of the first knight. Then, Pendragon's expression wrinkled for a moment. He was willing to compete against Muyong. But, he needed Muyong's approval to follow them. It was painful to hear the words without being drunk. I have a condition. You need to duel me at the same time every day. Muyong coolly spoke. The difference between the two was already completely opposite. But, the reason why he still wanted to fight against him was because there was still something to be gained from it. Just because someone was weak, it didn't mean nothing could be learned from them. Muyong was planning to do everything to complete his own swordsmanship. It was a challenge to bring out his own uniqueness that didn't exist in the past and was unique in this world. Something that only Muyong could do and should do. How could his heart not race? But, Muyong's meaning was simply distorted. In Pendragon's standpoint, it seemed as though Muyong was using his powers against him. Although he said it was a duel, it would be nothing more than one-sided violence. Pendragon had already acknowledged the skill difference between him and Muyong. For now, it was like a wall he couldn't climb over. Although it was a pure fight, he had never seen a person who tried to fight Han Sung equally and succeed. He's trying to show Serafina how he wins over me every day. All kinds of thought came to his head. However, Pendragon was far from a pessimist. He's a man whom my master acknowledged. There must be something I could learn from him as well. These days his skills were stagnant. The breakthrough could be Muyong. On top. They say women are attracted to men who work hard. It was Han Sung's theory. Regardless of victory or defeat, women liked men who tried their best. If he was to fall down, he just needed to get back up. Pendragon's eyes were ablaze. Then, he vowed to himself that he will learn everything he could from Muyong. I understand. Their exchange was ended with slight nods. In the same duel, different motives were exchanged. There was no way Muyong didn't read Pendragon's sudden change in attitude. It's no different than two people with the same destination but different routes. However, they needed to see who would reach their destination and who wouldn't be able to. There was something that changed when he became the first knight. First, it was the gaze of the surrounding priests and paladins. I never thought he would really become the first knight. They say he also became close with the Dragon Lord as well. I thought there would never be a first knight for Serafina. Because they were people too, it couldn't be helped for them to feel a bit of jealousy and envy with their surprise. However, Serafina's iron wall-like defense was well known even in Malalan. How many were there before him? Maybe more 50. As many as 50 people competed to become Serafina's first knight. They all met the conditions to become a first knight. If anyone could compete, more than 500 people would have jumped to compete for the position. And, among the 50 people, there were city owners and their children, even dominant figures of guilds and clans, and also Malalan's high priests and paladins. But, they all failed. It was because the standard of Serafina was too high. But this test was questionable, and so people talked. They say the contestants only completed the basic test, right? Not the 10 trials. If those who competed hear about this, there will be a storm of protest. Serafina's 10 trials were famous. Because so many people wanted to compete, Serafina personally made the trials hard. But, this time, she only made her contestants complete the basic test. Of course, Muyong passed without any difficulty. In fact, it was enough for all 50 challengers to pass the test. In other words, the 50 past challengers were just played for fools. Serafina had also heard of people talking but she dismissed it at once. He is a person who is qualified to have a sword duel with Dragon Lord Han Sung. What happened within the palace was only known by a few saintesses who were at the place. Of course, priests and paladins didn't know that Muyong fought with Han Sung. Those who heard of Serafina's story made a more surprised look. The qualification to have a sword duel with the Dragon Lord. Although her words were a bit ambiguous, it really depended on how you interpreted it. He had strength similar to the Dragon Lord, he was a man acknowledged by the Dragon Lord, he was a man weaker than the Dragon Lord but he had the potential to become stronger, many ways to view her words. It was also said he had extremely noble blood. As a result, the malice towards Muyong disappeared and only the mystery about him remained. The power of words. Of course, he had no interest in what people talked about. It was because from the beginning, after Han Sung left, Muyong continued to stay within his room, only leaving to duel with Pendragon. My own swordsmanship. His commitment to be free from imitations and to create an original swordsmanship of his own. There was nothing more different than this from his past as a tool. There was no day and night for Muyong. Although Han Sung said he forgot about the structure, his swordsmanship was naturally melted into his sword. That was how important the type of swordsmanship was. I want to encompass everything. The sun and the moon, the sea and the sky, the softness and the firmness, the swiftness and the slowness, everything. He was almost becoming a croc because he was so focused and thinking about just that. Within just a week, his cheeks were slimmer and dark circles drooped under his eyes. It was because Myung concentrated that much into creating his swordsmanship. As if he never concentrated on anything this much before, he continued to focus on it. If it wasn't for Serafina, he would have turned into a skeleton. And when 1 week had passed, Myung came out of his room. I can't make it here anymore. He needed to experience everything to create something that encompassed everything. Of course, revenge was also part of this. In the past, when Myung eradicated the forest of death, it wasn't a revenge in the truest sense. It was just a struggle. How could it be considered a true revenge when he killed everyone and even killed himself at the end? A true revenge was taking everything from his opponent and making everything he took his own. Serafina's eyes greatly widened after seeing Myung come out from his room. Are you done? Myung shook his head. Instead, he gave her a short reply. Let's go to Suicide Hill. Let's go see Wang Chunglin. The Diablo's altar was originally at Suicide Hill. Of course, there were also priests of Diablo. Enemies recognized as a cult by Malalan. Even by their size, since Diablo's priests were no match against Malalans, they couldn't help but to have to live in hiding. There was no room for them in the underworld where Malalan lead. O Vestal, the dirty seeds of Malalan are dirtying our mountains. Please give us an answer. Please pour endless despair and curses upon them. Inside a dark cave, within a huge void, hundreds of priests in black robes kneeled and bowed their head. They wished for an answer as they called out their Vestal. To them, Malalan was also their enemy. Although right now, Malalan was stronger, they were an enemy that needed to be destroyed. But, the paladins of Malalan were climbing the mountain without any hesitation. As if they already knew that the priests of Diablos were already at this place. If they were to stay put, they wouldn't be able to survive. Then, a woman who was on the altar raised her face. They will never be able to dirty our mountains. Thump! She smacked her cane down. At the same time the entire mountain shook once. A huge crystal talisman was on the cane. Talismans were the strength of the archangel that allowed wishes to come true. When the woman's power was added to it, there was an overwhelming presence. Also, the woman's voice was alluring. It was that much deep as well. Although her face wasn't visible because she used a cloth to cover her face, she still stole everyone's gaze. The woman also had another characteristic. The wings that were stretched beautifully. A woman with both a black and white wing. She was the Vestal of Diablo's altar. Chapter 169, Forest of Death, 2. Translation, Nadu. Edit, Lee Suras. Myung was still moving around with his armor and helmet on. He was drawing out his own world at the front of the line beside Serafina. The sword I have is cold-hearted. The sword he learned for 40 years while he was part of the Forest of Death was only cold-hearted. The fastest and most effective way to kill someone. It was a sword that cut infinitely for that sole purpose. However, that wasn't enough. For him to create his own sword, he needed to experience and learn a lot more. In that sense, the Kingslayer was the perfect fit. Kingslayer. His sword was honest. However, it was too honest that it was scary. It recognized every weakness and only went in that fixed direction. It excludes everything that blocks in the middle. Even if he wanted to imitate Kingslayer's sword, it wouldn't be easy. But, Myung couldn't just give up, and so he tried to fit himself into that frame in some way. Sword 1. His sword also had another color. It was like a spider web. It was very dense. It wasn't fast, but it was that much prudent and stable. And lastly, Dragon Lord Hansung. It was a swordsmanship that he dared to call a death sword. Although Myung had watched him for many years in the past, he was able to know it better now that he experienced it himself. Hansung didn't have a frame. That was why it was so irregular. His unique colors took away Myung. Myung was planning to take the advantages of his swordsmanship, get rid of the disadvantages and add his own color to it. It isn't easy. This was an opportunity. Rather than repeating the past, an opportunity to walk an entirely different path. If there was a God of creation, wouldn't it feel like this when he created the world? If there was something Weung was better off with, it was that the direction he was supposed to go towards was already given to him. They say that the cult members are gathered at Suicide Hill. As Serafina rode a horse, she received communications from a small crystal and this information was told to them. Then, Pendragon tilted his head. Cult members? Are you talking about heretics? Normally, Malalan doesn't call people heretics just because they didn't serve the same god. It's because Malalan believed the root of most gods was the mother of everything, idea. However, heretics weren't followers that served normal gods. They worshipped either evil gods or the demon gods. They called those who followed them heretics. And Weung knew why the heretics were gathered on top of Suicide Hill. Diablo's priests. Originally, Weung needed to head towards this place after gathering the 3 rings. However, thanks to Lucy Fair, he didn't have to go to the altar because he was able to mimic divinity. They say they were unable to confirm which cult religion it was. Just that they are followers of a strong evil god that can even move mountains. Do cults still exist? I thought they were all destroyed. Pendragon clicked his tongue. In the past, when demon gods first invaded the humans started to fear and worship their strength. People tend to be attracted to something that is eviler, darker, and more mysterious. As they believed it would protect them from the devil's attacks. But that was also sidetracked. After the invasion of the devils had ended, a few of them tried to become a privileged class. They gathered soldiers to create a city. They cruelly exploited people under the name of their gods. As the people who tried to benefit were left behind, those who were strong became more powerful, and the Dark Ages had arrived. The power of humanity was in an extremely vulnerable situation. When everyone was being quiet, the Sage King of Malalan came forward. And for 10 long years, the bloody war that was called the Holy Battle had arrived. It was widely accepted that the cult religions and heretics were destroyed during that time. However, their roots weren't completely removed. They say there are currently 5 cult religions that are identified and are of considerable size. They are like cockroaches. There isn't any action being taken by the Sage King. The current Sage King doesn't really like wars. True, from my memories, he was like a kindly neighborhood grandpa. Serafina grinned. Then, Pendragon secretly clenched his fist. He thought he could earn points like this from her. On the other hand, Weung rubbed his chin. It seems like there were less than 10 people gathered there. From what Weung could remember, Diablo's priests were weak. They were also small in numbers. At most, 10 people would be gathering near the altar. But, they were followers of a powerful evil god who could move mountains? It's strange. It was clearly strange. It was something that a talented paladin could handle on his own. However, if a report was sent to Serafina, it meant that he was outclassed by them. There is no one on Suicide Hill who I have influenced. Although butterfly effects were big, all of Weung's actions had nothing to do with Diablo's altar. It meant that there was no reason for a heretic to become stronger in power all of a sudden. However, there was something that was bothering him. Snow. The only variable from Weung. That was correct, snow was a variable. If she was really here, he was unsure what would happen on Suicide Hill. I think we need to hurry. Serafina erased her smile and spoke. If a report was received, it was sort of an SOS. It meant it was hard to cope with just the military power there. Currently, Serafina brought about 2,000 soldiers. She basically had the military power to fully find out what was going on. Weung was also really curious. I don't know what your intentions are, but... Weung was uneasy about Snow. He didn't know the reason why she was trying to help him and the reason why she approached him was unclear. But, the moment he pledged himself to create his own sword, those worries all disappeared. The current Muyeong was different from the one in the past. But, who Snow wanted could be the Muyeong in the past. If that was really true, she should wait for me. Muyeong's gaze became bleaker. The corpses overflowed. The rotten scent was strong. The ground had also died. All the surrounding grass and trees were stained black and were split. Suicide Hill was a place where low mountains were gathered. Because it was always heavily fogged and those who got lost weren't able to come out alive, the location was called Suicide Hill so that they could let people know of the danger. It was definitely heavily fogged. It was even hard to distinguish what was in front of you. Start the cleansing ritual. As Serafina spoke, the priests came out. There seemed to be about 200 corpses in the surrounding. Then, they started the cleansing by uttering the names of the earth and the sea god. The fog disappeared and the rotting smell also reduced. At least, the ground was stabilized. However, not everything was cleansed. Push. The corpses that were touched by the divine power got up. The priests who were closest to the corpses were killed first. Undead. They're undead. Why would undead react to divine powers? Serafina hurriedly turned her horse's head. Knights to the front! Serafina screamed as she drew her sword. She needed to protect the priests. If all the priests die, they would be unable to go through these deep hills. The divine powers don't work. It was quite far from normal. Muyeong quietly grabbed Anguish. At least, the paladins and the priests' divine powers didn't work against undead. On the other hand, the undead absorbed the divine powers and became stronger. When they were pierced by a sword with divine powers, they quickly regenerated. Everyone couldn't help but be taken back by the situation they never experienced before. However, there was also something else that was strange. They don't attack me. To be exact, undead were avoiding Muyeong. Although he drew Anguish, the few hundred undead didn't enter the area Muyeong was it. As if they were avoiding something they were afraid of. Muyeong forced in and cut up the undead. Then, the undead turned into dust and blew away. My divine powers work. Muyeong looked at Anguish and the undead that became dust alternately. For his experiment, he placed divine powers onto Anguish. Although the undead absorbed other divine powers from paladins and priests, they reacted as if Muyeong's divine powers were deadly poisonous. Was it because the source of Muyeong's divine powers was from Archangel Gabriel? Swoosh! Stab! When everyone was taken back and were helplessly attacked, out of nowhere arrows flew in and pierced through their heads like skewers. Swoosh! Swing! Afterwards, another few dozens of arrows dropped at once. Don't use divine powers. Those undead absorb divine powers. In the middle of all this, a woman appeared with her long blue hair blowing in the wind. She was also riding the same breed of white horse as Serafina, but she was wielding a huge bow. Cult Judge Ramiela. The newly appeared woman was one of the 7 cult judges. At the same time, a few thousand soldiers came out from behind Ramiela. They skillfully sliced off the undead's heads and instantly cleared their surroundings. Whew! Ramiela let out a sigh after she placed an arrow in the middle of the last undead's forehead. Ramiela. When the undead were cleared, Serafina quickly got off her horse. Then, she went towards Ramiela. Serafina seemed happy to see her, but Ramiela's face took on a set expression. It's been a long. Serafina, are you planning to kill all your soldiers? Serafina removed her smile as she heard Ramiela's question. What do you mean if I'm planning to kill all my soldiers? Your circumstantial judgment is so slow. Did you not see how the undead absorbed the divine powers? But, you didn't give any orders but just stood there. If it wasn't for me, your soldiers would have just died. Do you know? Ah! Serafina nodded her head. It was her mistake. Even though she saw the situation, her judgment was delayed because she was taken back. For every second she was late, one person died. If Ramiela didn't appear, there would have been huge losses. Please, pay attention. This place is a battlefield. Ramiela, I'll keep that in mind. You cannot perform the cleansing ritual carelessly. Since corpses can become undead. Why aren't the undead affected by the divine powers? That I'm not sure myself. I was barely able to confirm that the Diablos heretics are hiding in Suicide Hill. Ramiela shook her head. Although Ramiela had heard the god-killing spear was in this place, she hadn't heard about the heretics. Serafina was also taken back. Anyways Serafina, let's move to the gathering point. I understand. Please don't forget that although you were the top candidate to become a saintess, you are now a cult judge who needs to make better decisions than anyone else. Serafina stopped talking. Ramiela let out a small laugh. Who cares if she was one of the best candidates to become a saintess? Now, she was just a bad cult judge. When Serafina was about to turn her horse's head around, Ramiela asked her another question. By the way, you got yourself a first knight? Where is he? Beside Ramiela, there was a huge man who seemed to be over 2 meters tall. A knight was a huge greatsword. He was a man who seemed to be a match for 100 men. He's... Serafina turned her head. And she frowned for a moment. He wasn't there. Myung disappeared without a trace. He didn't run away leaving his cult judge behind, right? He isn't that sort of person. Then, why isn't he here? That's... Serafina didn't have anything to say. He was definitely here just a moment ago, but where did he go off to in that short period of time? Ramiela scoffed with all her strength. Pfft, you really suck. Wait. Aren't your words a bit too harsh? Suddenly, Pendragon came forward. It was because although they were both cult judges, their conversation was too aggressive. And you are? I'm Pendragon. I was a candidate to be Serafina's first knight. Ramiela smirked. Which means you aren't her first knight? That's true, but, either way, the real first knight isn't the type of person to just run away. He is very strong that he doesn't need to. Then, why isn't he here? I'm not sure about that. But, I hope you'll be cautious of what you say. Aren't you both cult judges? Your conversation doesn't sound friendly. It's just our way of expressing our affection. Isn't it true, Serafina? Serafina nodded weakly. Pendragon looked weird for stepping up. Pendragon knew that his image would only become stranger if he stepped up any further. That's what Serafina says, Pendragon. Don't intrude on what doesn't concern you. Ramiela turned her horse's head. Pendragon's face turned red. Are you really okay? When Pendragon asked Serafina as he suppressed his emotions, she replied weakly. Yes, but have you not seen Gale? No, I haven't. Where could he have gone? Serafina seemed like she didn't have any strength. However, even at this moment, how could she look for the man who suddenly disappeared? If it was him, he would have protected Serafina by her side no matter what. The problem was he couldn't say it out loud right now. And so, Pendragon didn't say a word. Myung ran. He ran, and continued to run. He didn't need to be secretive. The people he was pursuing were the ones Myung looked forward to meeting in the near future. The dead branches shook wildly. Myung's heart also raced wildly. Right now, the ones who were running away from Myung were the ones who watched Serafina and the priests from afar. The Forest of Death. Myung smiled widely. Chapter 170, Forest of Death, End. Translation, Nadu. Edit, Lee Suris. How long did he wait, longing for this moment? He ran tirelessly towards a different path from his past. Myung's goal was only Wang Chunlin. The rest of the assassins were no different than Wang Chunglin's scapegoats. However, it seemed like Wang Chunlin came to Suicide Hill leading a number of assassins. The assassins didn't speak. Instead, they were connected by a single command system. Their orders were clear. If there are any followers, to get rid of them. Myung didn't hide. He quickly shortened the distance between him and the assassins. It was obvious for him to get caught. 5 assassins stopped and looked at Myung. Myung also looked into their eyes. Assassins in the 100th number. Familiar faces. Those who could be considered his comrades as he trained with them in the past. Assassins in the 100th number were strong enough to kill most strong men. They were classified as high-rank assassins and 10 were above their rank, the Great Assassins and Wang Chunlin. If 5 100th numbered assassins were to gather, they would be able to do the work of one Great Assassin. And a Great Assassin could assassinate one of the top 10 humans by himself. Myung was also a Great Assassin in the past. However, he wasn't just a Great Assassin. He became number 0 after he killed Wang Chunlin. 5 100th numbered assassins weren't a match to Myung. Don't blame me. Myung spoke softly. It was Wang Chunlin who brainwashed them. Even if they were no longer brainwashed after years, decades of trying, they wouldn't be able to live a normal life. Nevertheless, Myung was a very special case. He gathered few thousands, no, few hundred thousands of people's status viewers. The status viewer was a compass that pointed to the person. Their information, the path they walked, everything was written in it. Myung read them all. That was how he kept his identity. However, for the rest, they were no different than breathing dolls. Swoosh! Numerous hills rolled up. A different trial existed on every hill. However, Serafina and Ramiela advanced without hesitation. Although people might say things about the two, they were both cult judges. They were able to reach the meeting point in half a day because they were 2 of the 7 cult judges who were selected among few hundreds of thousands of people in Malalan. Ramiel, Ramiel. The cult judges have arrived. Not just 1, but 2. We are now able to live. Everyone cheered. The gathered were in critical condition. There were tons of people who were suffering from critical injuries and moaning in pain. As proper treatments weren't readily available, they were just maintaining their current conditions. Even those who were moving normally seemed very tired. The fact that their enemy continuously attacked them day and night, and the terror that their divine powers didn't work against them, pressured them enormously. For the power of a divine empire, the power of God, to not work against cults. It was unthinkable. It's nice to meet you. Cult Judge Ramiel, Cult Judge Serafina. You are the vice captain of the Hoffener Paladin group. Are you the one giving orders at this place? Serafina asked first. Then, the person who was called the vice captain nodded his head. His armor was ragged and he had a splint on one arm. The past commander, Tooth, gave his life for us during a battle. So for now, although I'm lacking, I'm the one who is leading this place. It's really terrible. It wasn't Serafina. Ramiel, who descended from her horse, made a bitter remark. I have no face. The vice-captain bowed his head. There were about 10,000 paladins and priests who left for Suicide Hill. There was that much interest and it was a situation Malalan was actively watching over. But, what was this situation they were currently in? The Malalan status could not be felt at all. It was truly a remnant of a defeated troop. After 10,000 men came, not even half survived. On top, most were injured. There were at most 2,000 men they could use for battle instantly. Please explain to us. Exactly what cult religion has this much power? Serafina carefully asked. The cult religions were the ones that were needed to be destroyed. That should have been the case, but instead, they were the ones who were suffering. It was necessary for them to approach them more cautiously. The vice-captain started to talk. Do you know Diablos? Isn't it a devil that exists in literature? There was no one named Diablos among the 72 demon gods and their subordinates. However, when you read the ancient literature, he would solemnly appear in stories destroying the world. The vice-captain nodded his head. To be exact, Diablos is a demon god in a different world, not this one. Perhaps, he might be the devil within our imaginations. Normally, Diablos's power should not be inherent. Isn't that the limits of the heretics? Yes. The gods that don't exist or the evil gods are extremely reluctant to give out their powers. That is why there aren't many followers with their strength. But, gulp. The vice-captain gulped his saliva. His pupils shook greatly. There is a witch. A witch who has both white and black wings, is being revered as a vestal by the heretics. Black and white wings. Serafina was startled. She recovered quickly, but she couldn't do anything about her beating heart. Are you saying she has 2 pairs of wings? Yes, she is a being who is human, but not human. Someone who isn't of a form. The vice-captain's body shook. It was enough to know how severely they were destroyed. She's similar to Muyong. But, Muyong had 3 pairs of wings. However, Muyong did not follow an evil god. Because of his strength, his divine powers, were saintliness itself. Of course, the fact that he had wings was definitely an unusual thing itself. Not just that. There are people who are helping them. Ramiel stepped forward. She spoke with a disgruntled look on her face. A place that helps a cult is another cult itself. We need to consider them all with the harshest punishment. It isn't easy as we think. They are the deepest darkness of mankind. Do you happen to know of the Forest of Death? Are you saying the Forest of Death is involved in this? Ramiel's voice became cautious. There was no way she wouldn't know. The Forest of Death was the darkness of mankind. It was the place that was created when all kinds of ugly emotions came together. However, no one knew the true nature of the place. It was a strict cell. Even Malalan tried to find out about them for decades, but they only skimmed the surface. Everything was unclear as to how many members made up the organization, and how many groups there were, and who was in charge. Many priests and paladins were assassinated. Even I was wounded after an attack by one of their assassins. There was no confidence in his words. Someone who was recognized and had the position of vice-captain of a paladin group had already lost his fighting spirit. In reality, no one survived the assassination attack. Even if there were any, they all soon disappeared within a few days. They would continuously go after a target they have set their eyes on, even if a few years or a few decades passed. The persistence was enough to make someone quiver. The vice-captain was aware of his death. He knew that he wouldn't last long as the Forest of Death was after him. Be careful. You need to be alert of your surroundings. The assassins of the Forest of Death used all kinds of extraordinary methods to go after your life. Ramiel and Serafina's expressions hardened. Of all times, for it to be the Forest of Death. It was the only place Malalan couldn't really do much about. Although they presumed the size of the Forest of Death was the size of most huge organizations, there was no way to know for sure. Of course, even information known was limited. From now on, they needed to face the shadow and the Diablos' altar. Every day they shivered in the fear, struggling to keep it in check and be alert of an enemy they didn't know existed for certain. The influential power of the 3 words, Forest of Death, was greater than one's imaginations. Splat! Blood was splattered. The splattered blood was on his face. Muyong didn't even think to wipe it off. He continued to raid the places where the assassins hid. It was obvious where they hid their bodies. They hid themselves from outsiders completely, but Muyong had been a part of the Forest of Death for 40 years. It was too easy for him to find the places where the assassins would hide. On top, he needed their blood in order to find out where Wang Chunglin was. Blood is the medium. Wang Chunglin placed restrictions on his strong assassins. He restrained both their body and their soul. The blood was the medium for his brainwashing. However, thanks to this it was also his weakness. The blood of strong assassins was the only guide to find where Wang Chunlin was located. It was because Wang Chunlin needed to mix his own blood to place a strong restriction. The assassins I met in the great city were all low levels. With a fragmentary order, they moved simply. But, the assassins at this place, at Suicide Hill, were on a different level. Muiyong collected the assassin's blood and refined it. He started to extract only Wang Chunglin's blood and collect as much of it as he could. The problem was, for him to move with certainty, he needed to collect the blood of at least 50 assassins. Wang Chunlin. Did you bring the entire forest of death? That part was clearly resolved. The number of assassins hidden at Suicide Hill was more than he imagined. From the beginning, it seemed like Wang Chunlin brought over the main military strength of the Forest of Death. It seems like you're not simply after the god-killing spear. Muiyong didn't know what he was after. As everything at this place was a variable itself. He didn't try to think about it either. However, Wang Chunlin made a mistake. Like usual, he should have moved with just a few. It became easier for Muiyong to act because he brought everyone. By now, Wang Chunlin would have also noticed that something was wrong. He would have recognized that someone was hunting his assassins. Will you run? Or fight? However, it was still too late. As Muiyong was steadily headed towards where Wang Chunlin was located. Of course, he didn't move without any thought. Art of Death. The dead assassins were revived. In a much more stronger form. They would become Muiyong's minions and act. A dog biting the owner who raised it. How would it feel? Spat spat. Suddenly, a rain of daggers poured down from the sky. At least a few thousand daggers started to pour down like rain. Muiyong quickly twisted his body and used his thorn formation. Swoosh! While Muiyong was busy blocking the daggers, he felt someone behind him. Instinctively, he felt danger. Even if his defense was solid with his thorn formation skill, he couldn't help but be weak against a strong one-blow attack. Swift! Muiyong reacted faster. As anguish pierced through the air, an assassin who wore black clothing made one full turn in the air before landing on the ground. The mask the assassin wore was cut in half and dropped on the floor. Anguish didn't just pierce through the air. Muiyong smiled again after seeing the assassin's face. It was because he was able to find out Wang Chunglin's decision. If Wang Chunlin had sent this man, it meant that Wang Chunlin was willing to fight and not run away. How could he not smile? If Wang Chunlin did run away, Muiyong would have been disappointed. The Great Assassin. Number 10. The one who was after Muiyong was a great assassin. One among the 10 people who represented the Forest of Death. On top, the great assassins especially knew each other very well. A part of their mind was shared. Although it wasn't the case anymore, he felt like he met his family. The words that felt like they would overflow out of Muiyong's throat were forced down. It's been a while.